in traditional culture here, when we talk about ancestry and ancestors, we're not strictly only speaking about our bloodline, mother and father and grandfather and grandmother and grandfather and so on. There are also other ancestors. So the extent to which you live in a place and you eat from that place, you eat plants and animals and food, your food comes from that place. You are eating of the ground that contains the ancestry of that place. And to that extent, that place and all who lived there before you become ancestors. They're ingested into the matrix of your ancestry. In the same way, through being in a place, through eating of that land, and through your consistent being present to it, your ancestry also then begins to incorporate all the nature spirits, the spirits of rivers and the spirits of plants and trees. And the longer you're there, the stronger that relationship gets, as with any relationship. So that's another aspect of ancestry. And then, of course, you're drinking water all the time, water that passes through everything else. It passes through trees and plants and passes through other people. And not only just in that place, but throughout the world. So that also then brings other ancestry into you. So you have what we call the ancestors of water. We have the ancestors of place. We have the spirits of place and so on. These are all, they become part of us. They become part of who we are. Of course, this is complicated nowadays because we eat oranges from Brazil and grapes from Greece or wherever it happens to be, and fish from the North Sea, and so we're not eating food that comes from the land on which we live, and that kind of, from a traditional perspective here, complicates ancestry somewhat, and complicates our relationship with the place we live, because if our means of nourishing ourselves comes from the place we live, that's a very particular relationship that's forged. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately, we do and can build ancestry by being in a place. There's a way in which that slowly grows in us and through us, and there's a way in which also, if we attend to it consciously, if we employ the techniques that we once had pre-industrially of working with place, of working with spirit, of working with the old stories, of the practices, if we begin to incorporate these things, we can begin consciously cultivating what in an ancestral culture would be called our relationship with ancestors on all these different levels. And there's a kind of an interweaving that starts to take place through that. So I think part of it involves remembering or finding out or redreaming those practices that we have always had since way, 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 way back, and many of which we've now dispensed with, of how we connected to each other, to place, to everything. And that's I think also part of the core of this time, and I do think that there is a responsibility in that as well, because in the end we are responsible for the relationships we find ourselves in, and for the relationships we cultivate. There's a responsibility that comes with that, and we only need look at any of our interhuman relationships to begin to understand and to identify the ways in which we are called to be responsible to those relationships. The same applies to everyone in an animate universe. We're in relationship with everyone to a greater or lesser degree. And I think that the fundamental precepts that undergird relationship per se, whether interhuman or other, are pretty much ubiquitous to all relationships. We need to turn up to relationships. There's a certain level of commitment that's required of us. There's an authentic engagement that's required of us. There's a cultivating that's required of us. There's a tending and a caring that's required of us. These are things that we are called to engage with, I believe, with where we are, and where we are, by the way, in an animate universe is whom we're with, rather than simply where we are. The land is whom. It's a spirit. It's a being. The river is a spirit. The mountain is a spirit. The animals, of course, are all spirits. We're all spirits. We're all living entities. And living entities have the capacity to relate to each other. They all innately relate to each other. There's a relationship that is born through the intercreaturehood of ourselves.